Hello and welcome to StratoCast, the UK Southeast Battletech podcast, where we look at tactics, strategy and gameplay. My name is Stuart, StratoCast Level 3, and today we're going to look at a rule that a lot of people find difficult to get hold of, and that's skidding and the associated rule of side slipping, which is a separate rule, and we're going to look at why they're separate and how they work separately. Now, to help in doing this, I've got a instance of MegaMek running, and MegaMek is our tabletop simulator. It simulates all of the rules, and so it will work exactly the same way as it will work on the tabletop. And we've got a daredevil team here of Locust, Rotunda Scout Cars, Pegasus Scout hovercraft and cavalry attack helicopters ready to do some daring stunts here to show why skidding is a bad idea. And you can see we've created this giant skid pan track, which is just basically a huge slab of concrete and with a few interesting features here which we're going to use in this demonstration. So skidding, why does it happen? What does it happen? Well, skidding occurs whenever you are moving on, or I should say particularly running or moving at flank speed on a pavemented concrete surface or road. It can happen with ice as well, but we'll mainly stick to roads. So anywhere in cities where you have pavements, roads, you can generate a skid. So if your unit is moving at a run, it doesn't happen if you walk, only if you run. If you're moving at a run or in a vehicle, if you're moving at the equivalent of run, which is flank speed, then you can cause a skid. Now, it only affects ground vehicles, so things that are so BattleMechs, wheeled or tracked vehicles. It doesn't affect skidding, doesn't affect hovercraft or VTOLs or winging ground effect. Those are covered by side slipping, which is subtly different from skidding and has a couple of different rules. So this is something that took me a while to grasp, that helicopters and hovercraft don't follow the skid rules, they follow side slipping. So if you want to look up the skid rules are on page 61 of the Total Warfare. It's also found in the BattleMech manual. I'm not sure what the page number is, I'll put it in the notes for that. And we're going to do a very simple demonstration just to show what happens when you skid. So we've got some locusts here. Now, to make this really a good demonstration, we've made all of the locust pilots really bad. They all have a piloting skill of 8. And we've also, just to make sure that they skid, we've given them some leg damage. So I've given them a damaged upper leg actuator on both legs. And that should be enough to create some spectacular skids. So we're going to start with this guy here. We're going to do a straightforward skid. He's going to run his maximum speed, and his maximum speed at the moment is normally 812, but I've hobbled him a bit and given him 2 points of leg damage, so his maximum speed is 69. So when you're moving, so if we just move along here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to go to here 7. Now, skidding occurs when you turn in a hex and then attempt to move out of that hex. It doesn't occur when you turn in a hex and don't move out of the hex. So for instance, in this situation, this unit would not skid. It would move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It'd move 7 to enter that hex. It'd turn to change facing, spending another movement point, and then nothing else would happen. It wouldn't skid. Okay, skidding only occurs when you try and move to this hex. So at that point, you'd get a skid. And actually, in fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, is it not letting me go forward? Let's try that again. So my movement should be 6, 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Turn. Oh, I still had turn on. That was why. Turn to there and then walk into that hex there. And now you see in MegaMek you get a star indicating that there is a chance of a skid check. Something about movement points when you're doing skidding. This move here costs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 movement points. 1 to change, that's 8 movement points. And you pay the movement point of the hex you're entering. So you actually pay this movement point to get into this hex, even though we might not get there. So that's that. I'm going to skip over the rest. So move, and we've got a chance of skidding. So let's see what that chance is. So we need an 11 to avoid skidding. It's an 8 for the base pilot skill, +1 for each damage, and also we've got a +1 modifier based on the distance that they've moved. So if you're moving 0 to 2 hexes, there's a -1 to skid rolls. If you're moving 3 to 4, there's a 0 chance to skid rolls. On a 5 to 7, there's +1 chance to skid rolls. 8 to 10, +2. 11 to 17, +4. 18 to 24, +5. And 25 or more, which is possible, I'm going to show you that, is a +6 chance. So there is a chance that this won't will make its piloting skill test. I hope it doesn't, because I'll have to set up the demonstration again. So we're going to make this test, and there he goes. What happened? Well, there, it's actually skidded. So it's skidded and gone prone. So what you can see has happened is it's travelled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 turns there, and now it's skidded. First of all, it skids 1 hex to get to here. So rather than basically entering this hex, it skids 1 hex and then travels a number of hexes equal to half of the hexes moved, rounded up. So it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, moved to here 7, went to change direction 8, tried to move to there for 9, and then skidded 4 hexes, which is 7 hexes divided by 2, which is 3 rounded up, 3.5 rounded up to 4. So it goes 4 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we look at the damage report for this guy, what actually happened, so if I go to, I don't remember where this is now, view round report, here we go, you can see what's happened. Oh, it won't tell me to the end. Oh, here it is then. So this is what's happened. No, it's not going to tell me to the end. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but we'll be able to see exactly what damage has been done. So I'm just going to skip the movement for the other units, because they're going to come in for our demonstration in a minute. We've got some crazy stuff coming up here, where we're going to demonstrate lots of different skid instances and rules. Okay, so this is what happened to our Locust. Our Locust must make a piloting skill roll, need an 11, roll a 5, failed. It doesn't matter by how much you fail by with a skid, just if you fail. It then is going to fall, and when it falls, it takes damage as a fall in the hex that it's skidded into. So that's just a normal fall. Since it's a Locust, it takes 2 damage because it's 20 tons. 20 tons divided by 10 is 2. But then it skids each hex. It basically takes another point of damage for every hex it goes through. So it suffers 4 damage from the skid because it moved 4 hexes. So it's half the damage from a fall, or the tonnage divided by 20. So a Locust skidding only does 1 damage for each hex it skids. Something like an Atlas, if it's skidded, would do 5 damage for each hex it skids. So that's the basic skid rules. So whenever you are moving on concrete by using a run movement, and that you turn and then try and leave the hex, only if you try and leave the hex, that triggers a skid check. And you can have multiple skid checks in a turn as well. So let's have a look at another more spectacular skid. Just going to skip through the firing phase because we're not firing any weapons. Okay, so in this example, we're going to see what happens when you impact on something. And we're going to go for a building. We're going to do quite a spectacular one here. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, change direction and go to there. Then we're going to skid, and if I've done this right and he doesn't make his check, he's going to skid straight into this light, level 5 light building with a basement. So normally you could roll randomly if you're using the basement rules, which is in Total Warfare, whether there's a basement or not. And we're going to see what happens. Ready? 3, 2, 1, and go. Oh dear. Let's see what's happened. Okay, so skip the other movements. So in this case, we've failed our skid roll on a 7. We've fallen on the left side, taking 2 damage. Then we've skidded 4 hexes because it's the half the number of hexes moved, rounded up. And then we hit the building. So the light building absorbs 12 points of damage because we've charged at it. Okay, so we did a charge, which was 2 points of damage with 6 a 6 move hex move, and then as we've hit that building, we enter the building. So the building of the basement, the hex collapses. The locust falls into the basement, taking 6 points of damage. Oh dear! The pilot blacks out, which is probably a good sign. Falls on its right side, suffering 2 damage. Pilot takes more damage falling. Takes 3 damage from the skid, and then the building collapses due to the damage it took, and the locust is crushed under the rubble. So that is probably one of the most spectacular deaths you can get with a mech in a city, where you basically skid into the building, you do enough damage to collapse the building, and then as you fall through the building's basements, then the whole building comes down on top of you. So a spectacular crash there. One of the reasons why running on pavements in a city can be potentially dangerous. It's also why a lot of people choose not to have the basement rules, because the basement rules can be really unforgiving if you enter a basement and fall. Let's do another example. I'm going to skip through the fire phase here again. You might be wondering why there's a line of infantry here. We'll find out in a minute. Okay, for our next example, next daredevil example, we are going to just skip that one. We're going to drive this locust, or run this locust into a hillside. And so again, we're going to move 7, and we're going to skid here. And then when we skid, if you hit a change in elevation going up, you don't go up the elevation, you hit the change in elevation and you skid to a halt here. So let's try that. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh dear. Come to a screeching stop there, and we'll see what happens to him in a minute. Now when you do skid, your movement ends automatically. So even if you've basically moved 1 hex and skidded, which is possible, or even 0 hexes, it's possible, then you basically, your movement stops and you fall, and you then can't take any more movement that turn, which is different from side slipping, which I'll show you. The other point is that when you fall, you instantly have a +2 modifier to be hit. So if anyone tries to actually shoot you after you're skidding, okay, add +2 to the hit modifier for all weapons and physical attacks made against that skidding unit, but you get a +1 modifier to shoot while you're skidding. So you can actually fall and skid and shoot. Quite spectacular if you manage to pull that off. So I'm going to skip through the movement of these other ones. Okay. So what have we got here? We've got the falls. Locust suffers 4 damage because of the skid from 4 hexes. And then the locust basically suffers 3 damage from the skid and from skidding into the wall. So crashed into hill. Locust takes 1 damage to the left arm. So it doesn't matter how many hexes you've moved to charge into the hole, you only basically take your tonnage divided by 20 from hitting a wall. So you could have run quite far, but he took his tonnage divided by 20 for each hex he moved through, which was only 3, and then he impacted the wall. And then of course his movement stops because it stops after a skid. So skip through the fire phase, and then we're going to have a look at vehicles. Now, tracked and wheeled vehicles skid in much the same way as mechs, except they've got a chance of taking automotive damage whenever they skid. So we'll do that one in a minute. There we go. So we got a Rotunda Scout Car. A Rotunda Scout Car has got some damage. It's a 812, and it's taken light automotive damage, which means it's got +1 modifier. And we're going to try and do a skid with this. So we're going to go as far as it can go, which is going to be 12, but we only go 10. And then once we get to 10, we're going to then try and skid it here. Okay, and because it's moving 10 hexes to get to there, it's moved 10 hexes to get to, well, actually it's only moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and yeah, 10 to get to there. And so that would mean that it's got a +2 to the skid modifier, because this is still counted as a skid, so it's using the same rules. So we're going to set that one off. 3, 2, 1, go. And off he goes. Okay, so he's done a skid. He's gone off in this direction. He hasn't fallen because mechs don't fall, vehicles don't fall, but he has done a skid, and we'll see what the skid check has done in a minute. Let's skip through the rest of the movement phase. You're really wondering now what we're going to do with these foot infantry and Atlas, and you'll see in a minute. Okay, so the Rotunda Scout makes a piloting check while moving on pavement. It fails. Again, it doesn't matter by how much you fail. The skid test, it's just a fail. It then moves, because it went 10 hexes, it skids 5 hexes, and it checks for a chance of automotive damage, which is where you basically roll 2d6 and compare it to the automotive chart on the damage, and it instantly takes, in this case, heavy automotive damage. So any tracked or wheeled vehicle that skids takes an automotive, a chance of automotive damage. Again, you just roll a 2d6 normal test. 2 to 5 is no damage, 6 to 7, etc. Wheeled vehicles have got, of course, a +2 bonus to this roll because they're wheeled. Tracked vehicles have no, so they can skid. So it does make wheeled vehicles more prone to automotive damage when they skid. Okay, now let's do something spectacular. Now we're going to get crazy. Skip the fire phase. I wish there was a skip all just for situations like this. So you might be wondering why there's an Atlas and 3 platoons of foot infantry. We're going to show, hopefully, what happens when you skid through other units and you do something called an unintentional charge. Now, this may or may not work because down to the tenets of luck here. So let's skip that. Okay, for our next example, we're going to see what happens when you get an unintentional charge. So this charger, quite appropriately, the 1x1 charger, I think it is, which one is it? It's the 1x1 charger, yeah, that has a turbo supercharger, so it gets 10 movement points, is going to charge towards this row of foot infantry, an Atlas, and at the Atlas's feet is a striker-like tank as well in the same hex. and we're going to see what happens. So it runs 8, turns and goes up to 10 movement with its supercharger. So it's going to have to make a test here when it gets to 8. Has to roll 3 or more for the supercharger not to fail, and needs a 10 to pass here. So let's see what happens with this unintentional charge. The unintentional charge, every time that you enter the hex after skidding, you might then affect the units. So let's go. Oh, and it's charged all the way through. Let's see what happens in the round report. So what's happened in the unintentional charge here? Just move this back over here. So we've made the test, we've failed the skid roll, fallen, taken damage from falling, or he fell on his head. Then he's started to move, and when he skidded into the infantry automatically avoid the damage from the avoid being hit by the charger, because infantry can't be charged. You can't charge infantry. And then he skids into the Atlas's hex, needs an 11 to hit, rolls a 6 and misses. Skids into the striker light tank, needs an 11 to hit, rolls a 5 to miss. So what happens when you enter the hex, you have to make a charge attack as if you were charging just like the normal rules with a piloting skill roll. And even if you do succeed, your opponent, your target, gets to make a piloting skill roll to avoid the collision, and if they pass that, they can avoid that collision. And then it acts as a normal charge with the number of hexes moved times the mass divided by 10 being the damage you cause. Of course, the charger's taking the skid damage from skidding 4 hexes though, and then because he's not been successful in the charge though, he has displaced the Atlas backwards, which is interesting because normally if you're unsuccessful in a charge, you get displaced to the left or to the right of the unit. But in this case, it seems to have applied it that the Atlas gets displaced back. I'm not sure if that's applied correctly or not. I would think that if you fail your unintentional charge, then you would be displaced to 1 hex to left, 1 hex to the right. But that's an example of unintentional charging. So unintentional charging can't affect infantry, but it can hit other units. And we missed though, but it would have done a charge attack, and it would only be against the legs though. So that's the other thing. It would only be against the legs, or in some rare circumstances, it could be to other hit locations. But to a standing mech, it would only affect the legs when you skid into them. Okay, so for our next death-defying stunt, we are going to take this Rotunda Scout vehicle and we're going to jump it off of the ledge. And then standing at the end of the ledge here, we have an Atlas that's just peacefully just minding his own business, just standing there. So I've given the Rotunda Scout vehicle some damage to mean hopefully it'll fail its pilot skill roll. We're going to go 9 to here. We're going to turn. We're going to generate a skid, and it should skid 5 hexes. And then we're on a level 6 ramp here, and then it's going to fall off of the edge after it skids because it's going to skid 5 hexes. So we're ready for a big countdown for this one. Let's see what happens. Moving 11, 3, 2, 1, go. Oh dear, it's gone off the edge. Let's see what's happened there. Oh dear. So it skidded, failed to skid roll on a 12, took automotive damage, skidded 4 hexes, then fell off the edge, fell 6 levels into the hex, causing an accidental fall from above, so like an accidental death from above. Collision occurs on a piloting skill roll greater 8 or greater, rolls a 10. So the Atlas takes 2 damage from the collision. Now, only 2 damage. It doesn't take the same as Death from Above, where you take the number of levels fallen. I'm not sure if that's as correct as it should be. And then after the fall, the vehicle has suffered from a level 6 fall, which is 2 points of damage times 6 levels, plus the damage from the hitting the Atlas. So it's taken 14 damage and explodes in a ball of flames. Doesn't actually, it survives. Wow, gets to drive off, well, very slowly. For our next death-defying demonstration, we're going to show why not to fly helicopters at speed around a building. So here's our helicopter. We're going to fly full speed, our cavalry helicopter 1015. Let's get to the movement phase. Okay, so it's going to fly full speed up towards this this building here. We're then going to turn to avoid the building. We don't want to fly into the building. We're only at level 1, so this is a level 5 building. So we're going to turn and go this way. And then we're going to turn and go this way. So I'm going to try generating 2 instances here where we could have a side slip test. One here and one here, and we'll see what happens. Now he only needs an 8 to do this, so we might actually succeed. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh no, he doesn't. Okay, so the cavalry helicopter fails. Now, because this is side slipping, when you side slip, you side slip by a number of hexes equal to the margin of failure. The margin of failure was 4 because he rolled a 4 and needed an 8. So that means he side slips 4 hexes up to a maximum of half of the number of hexes moved, which was 10. So in this case, he hit the building, okay, with a charge, taking damage to the rotor, which is not divided by 10. That's only if you get hit it by weapon damage. Takes 3 damages to the rotor, armor destroyed, 2 damage, rotor damage, critical hits, roll is 11, rotor blown off, and the helicopter then plummets to the ground, and everybody dies. Okay, so that's why not to fly a helicopter at speed, at flank speed, low level in a city, and definitely not a good idea. Vehicles that use VTOL movement, or vehicles that use wing and ground effect movement, or hovercraft, which technically count are ground vehicles as well, rather than airborne vehicles, all use side slipping. Now, with side slipping, they still have a chance of basically move. If they go flank speed, they've got a chance of not ending up where they want to. But it doesn't matter how many hexes you move, it doesn't change the chance of it happening. So there's no modifier table like there is. So there's no skid modifier table on page 63. You don't use the skid modifier table. Something I did quite wrong for quite a long time when I was playing. I was applying the skid modifier table for side slipping. That doesn't happen. So this Pegasus Scout vehicle has got a movement of 12. So we're going to move to 10, turn, and try and go to this hex. And if it fails, which it might not, but I've set the pilot skill to 8 and given it automotive damage, it will then skid. Now the skidding is not, well, although in side slip I should say, the side slipping is not the same as skidding. In side slipping, the margin of failure determines how far you move. So you can move 1 hex for every margin of failure. Margin of failure means how much you missed the dice roll by. So if the target number is a 10 and you rolled an 8, you're going to side slip 2 hexes. You're going to side slip 2 hexes to a maximum of half the number of hexes you have moved so far. So it's a bit more easy to control in a way, hovercraft and VTOLs. So let's see if we can get this one to skid. He needs a 9, so he might make this roll. Let's hope not. 3, 2, 1, go. No, he doesn't make the roll. But let's see how much he failed it by, because he only went 1 hex. So it means he's only failed it by a margin of failure of 1. So here we go. Pegasus must make a piloting skill roll while moving and flanking speed and then turning. Needs a 9, 8 plus 1 because I gave it some stereo damage. It rolled an 8, failed. So it had a margin of failure of 1. And because it had a margin of failure of 1, it sidesteps 1 hex. Otherwise, it's considered the same as skidding for purposes of collisions. So for collisions with walls, for collisions with mechs, collisions with units, it's considered the same. But for how much it moves and applying the skid modifier table, you don't apply the skid modifier table to the target roll because it's a side slip. And the margin of failure determines how much you skid, not the number of hexes you've moved, although that does cap it at a maximum. So the maximum even if this Pegasus had rolled double 1, it could still only have moved, I think it would have only have moved 5 hexes, which is half the difference, half the movement. So that's side slipping and why side slipping is different. And it works the same with vehicles, the VTOL, hovercraft and wing and ground effect vehicles. Those are the kind of like aircraft that fly very close to the ground using large wing and ground effect wings. You don't tend to see them much in games. Okay, so for our last spectacular finale, we have 4 celerity drones. These have a movement of 40 points because they have mask and superchargers, and so we're going to run them straight at our Lyran Scout Lance of 4 Atlases. So let's see how this ends up. So our celerity drones can move 40. We're going to move them 38 hexes. We're then going to turn at the last minute and then go into the next hex, triggering a skid chance, and let's see what happens. So if this fails, and I've set it up so it will automatically fail, he's going to skid 19 hexes, a 38 divided by 2. Now it's got masks, so the mask could fail. My mask rolls always seem to fail. And a supercharge you have to test as well. And a skill of 13, so that's going to be an automatic failure. Because you've moved 25 hexes or more, there's a +6 to the test for skidding. Off it goes. Oh, and it's skidded. And there it ends up. Okay, and you can see it's displaced this Atlas back. So we'll see what happens in the round report in a minute. Let's go for number 2. 38. Turn. I have to do the turn because otherwise you can actually avoid side slipping with quad mechs, because quad mechs don't have to turn, they can do a sidestep which doesn't trigger skidding. Mask, supercharger, 3, 2, 1, go. Off it goes, and oh, there's an explosion there. That doesn't look good. Next one. .38. Turn. Walk into the next hex. Mask failure, supercharger failure. 3, 2, 1, go. Off he goes, and skids. And finally, let's do this last one. .37, 38, turn, and walk, triggering our skid test. mask test, supercharger test. 3, 2, 1, go. Bang. Okay. Let's see what all the atlases survived. Let's see what happened in the round report. So our first celerity skids. It skids 19 hexes. So because it skidded 19 hexes, it takes 19 points of damage. And then it needs an 8 to avoid this test, which I'm sure this is MegaMek's doing this wrong, but we'll have to check on that. And rolls a 7, skids into an atlas on the hex, needs an 11, rolls 5, misses. Next one. Does it avoid the skid? No, so it basically hits the atlas, and it does that a total of 60 damage because it was a charge of a 10-ton mech. No, 15-ton mech, sorry, 15-ton mech. So that's 1.5 times by the number of hexes it moved, which was 38. So 1.5 times 38, 60 damage, or plus 4 damage because of spikes on them. They're great celerities. And this celerity was charged. Oh, that's the same celerity. This celerity blew up when it impacted. And then the next celerity, number 3, it skidded. Again, skidded 19 hexes and suffered 19 damage from the skid. Hit the atlas. So needs an 8 to avoid the skid. Skids into the atlas. Needs an 11. Rolls 7. Misses. So it doesn't actually hit. And the last one missed as well. So most spectacular example of a skidding there. A 19 hex skid with possible collision at the end, doing 60 damage to the legs on an atlas, and it still stood. Impressive. So hopefully you enjoyed our little demonstration video of skidding and side slipping, the differences and just some of the rules about that. You can read up on that on page 61 on Total Warfare and 67 for the side slipping. Remember, skidding and side slipping are different, often things that we mix up in games. And remember, never run on concrete. It is very dangerous. Until next time, goodbye.